January 6th, 2021. America was on edge. The Capitol loomed as Trump addressed the crowd,
to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard,
urging them to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard. The echoes of that day still reverberate. But what if things had gone differently in 2020? What if Trump had won? How would his policies have shaped the last few years? Before we explore that alternate reality, from his COVID-19 response to economic and foreign policy, let's take a look at where we stand under President Biden. What's really happening in our country and on the global stage? This was San Francisco. And this is San Francisco now. In just a few years, car break-ins have surged nearly 200%. Drug issues and public safety concerns are soaring, with vehicular homelessness up 94% since 2022. Businesses are closing, residents are fleeing, and it's not just San Francisco. Cities across America face the same grim reality. Lawlessness and theft are becoming the norm, and the response inadequate. Meanwhile, in New York, the migrant crisis is pushing shelters to their limits. Over 205,000 migrants have arrived since 2022, and the city is on track to spend $12 billion by 2025 just to keep up. As the cost of living rises and wages lag, retailers are losing billions to theft, with projections showing shoplifting could exceed $150 billion by 2026. Globally, the war in Ukraine drags on, with U.S. military aid surpassing $113 billion by 2023, yet still no resolution. Meanwhile, rising tensions between Israel and its neighbors further destabilize. So where does that leave us? Is the Biden administration doing enough, or would a second Trump term have led to different outcomes? The COVID-19 pandemic was undoubtedly the defining challenge of Trump's first term. While the virus didn't discriminate, the responses to it varied significantly. Under Trump's leadership, a second term would likely have taken a markedly different approach compared to what we experienced under President Biden. Imagine Trump overseeing the vaccine rollout. Would Operation Warp Speed have maintained its momentum, or would distribution have encountered more obstacles? With Trump's skepticism toward government mandates, we likely would have seen fewer federal interventions. States would have been left to manage vaccine distribution on their own, leading to a patchwork of responses across the country. This could have resulted in stark disparities in vaccine access and public health outcomes from region to region. Experts say 70 to 90% of the population needs to be vaccinated for herd immunity. But achieving that under a fragmented approach would have been a huge challenge. Furthermore, Trump's reluctance to impose mask mandates or lockdowns might have led to fewer restrictions, which some would have welcomed, but also to prolonged outbreaks. His approach to reopening the economy would have prioritized getting businesses back to normal, but at what cost? The balance between protecting lives and livelihoods would have been a constant tension. As the nation grappled with the pandemic's health impacts, economic recovery became a pressing concern. In terms of economic recovery, Trump's administration would likely have continued to push for stimulus packages, but with a different focus than Biden's. While Biden's American Rescue Plan emphasized long-term recovery and social safety nets, such as expanded child tax credits, Trump might have prioritized direct payments to boost consumer spending, similar to the $1,200 checks issued under the CARES Act. His stimulus proposals, estimated at $650 billion, contrast with Biden's nearly $3.1 trillion plan. Additionally, Trump would likely have continued favoring businesses, with targeted relief for industries like hospitality, travel, and oil and gas, as seen with the $800 billion Paycheck Protection Program. Supporters of Trump's approach could argue that prioritizing business recovery would have accelerated economic growth, though critics might contend that this focus could have left vulnerable populations with less support. Unemployment benefits, a critical lifeline for many during the pandemic, might have been reduced or tied to job search requirements earlier in Trump's second term. His administration's goal would likely have been to incentivize people to return to work quickly, potentially at the expense of those in industries still struggling to recover. The result? A quicker economic rebound for some, but a slower and more painful recovery for others. The social and political polarization that characterized Trump's first term would have only deepened in a second. The stakes were high in 2020, and a Trump victory would have solidified his position as a polarizing figure who inspired both fierce loyalty and intense opposition. The Black Lives Matter movement gained unprecedented momentum in 2020, partly in response to Trump's handling of racial issues. A second term could have amplified these tensions. Trump's rhetoric and policies, often seen as dismissive of concerns raised by racial justice advocates, would likely have fueled further protests and activism. His administration's focus on law and order, emphasizing a strong police presence and tougher sentencing, might have escalated confrontations between protesters and law enforcement. The social fabric of the nation would have been strained as communities demanded change, while the administration doubled down on its stance. These tensions could have led to more clashes in cities nationwide, deepening the divide between different segments of the population. Trump's re-election could have emboldened his supporters and deepened the rift between Republicans and Democrats. His confrontational style, combined with policies that often targeted his political adversaries, would likely have further polarized the nation. Political discourse might have become even more hostile, with both sides retreating into their corners, unwilling to compromise. The divide wouldn't just be between political parties, it would extend to how Americans view the very fabric of democracy. Issues like election integrity, media trust, and the role of government would have become even more contentious, shaping the political landscape for years to come. One of the most enduring legacies of any president is their appointments to the federal judiciary, and Trump made it a priority to reshape the courts. In a second term, this would have only continued with profound implications for the future of American law. With several aging justices on the Supreme Court, Trump's potential to appoint additional conservative judges would have been significant. The ideological balance of the court could have tipped even further to the right, influencing decisions on key issues like abortion, healthcare, and gun rights. Imagine a court that rules more consistently in favor of conservative principles. Cases related to Roe v. Wade, the Affordable Care Act, and Second Amendment rights could have seen landmark decisions that would reshape American society for decades. Beyond the Supreme Court, Trump's appointments to lower federal courts would have continued to shift the judiciary. By the end of Trump's term in January 2021, nearly 30% of all federal judges were Trump appointees, including 3 of the 9 Supreme Court justices and 54 federal appellate judges. This represents the most Supreme Court appointments by any president since Ronald Reagan, who appointed 4. These judges, often serving for life, would have influenced everything from civil rights cases to business regulations. The judiciary's role as a check on executive power would have been tested, particularly in areas where Trump's policies pushed legal boundaries. And let's not forget about his personal legal battles. By 2024, Trump faced a slew of legal challenges on both the criminal and civil fronts, such as the New York hush money case, where he was convicted on 34 felony counts. On the global stage, Trump's approach to foreign policy marked a significant departure from the traditional diplomatic strategies of his predecessors. His America First doctrine, characterized by a mix of isolationism, economic nationalism, and unpredictability, reshaped global relationships in profound ways. Supporters say this strategy put American interest front and center, but it also raised concerns about rising tensions, economic fallout, and a diminished U.S. role in global leadership. A second Trump term would likely have continued to disrupt the established world order, with significant implications for international relations, trade, and global security. The U.S.-China relationship was one of the most critical and contentious aspects of Trump's foreign policy. During his first term, Trump launched a trade war with China, aiming to address the trade imbalance and curb intellectual property theft. By late 2019, the U.S. had imposed tariffs on roughly $350 billion worth of Chinese goods, while China retaliated with tariffs on $100 billion of U.S. exports. This tit-for-tat escalation sent shockwaves through the global economy, affecting industries from agriculture to technology. The consequences were significant. A September 2019 study by Moody's Analytics estimated that the trade war had already cost the U.S. economy nearly 300,000 jobs and reduced real GDP by about 0.3%. Yet, Trump's tough stance on China was unlikely to waver. A second term would likely have seen an escalation of this trade conflict, with additional tariffs and sanctions looming. This scenario would have further strained global supply chains, driving up prices for consumers and causing more disruptions in industries reliant on Chinese manufacturing. Key sectors like electronics, automotive, and agriculture would have been hit hardest, creating ripple effects that reverberated across both American businesses and global markets. The stakes were high, and the world watched closely as tensions between the two economic giants continued to mount. However, Trump also prided himself on being a deal maker, and a second term might have seen him pushing for a new trade agreement with China, one he could proudly claim as a victory for American workers and industries. Such a deal would likely have demanded major concessions from China, particularly on issues like intellectual property and market access. The Phase 1 trade agreement, reached in January 2020, was a significant step, with China committing to purchase an additional $200 billion in American goods by the end of 2021. But by the end of that period, China had only met about 58% of its targets, falling far short of expectations. This raised critical questions about China's willingness to meet future demands and the effectiveness of the agreement itself. As the US and China navigated their increasingly complex trade relationship, the COVID-19 pandemic added a layer of unpredictability. The pandemic disrupted global supply chains and economic activity, making it even harder for China to meet its purchase goals. By 2024, the trade relationship remained strained, with ongoing tariffs and trade barriers casting uncertainty over the future of US-China trade relations. Trump's relationship with NATO and traditional European allies was often rocky. He repeatedly criticized NATO members for not contributing enough to the alliance's defense budget, even threatening to reduce US commitments if other countries didn't step up. By July 2023, only 11 of the 31 NATO member countries had met the 2% GDP defense spending target, while the US contributed 3.49% of its GDP. This created tension with key allies and raised concerns about the future of the transatlantic alliance. In a second term, Trump might have continued pressuring NATO members to increase their defense spending, potentially weakening the alliance further. This could have emboldened adversaries like Russia, which has long sought to undermine NATO's cohesion. A less united NATO could have increased the risk of Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, particularly in countries like Ukraine and the Baltic states. Additionally, Trump's skepticism of multilateral agreements and institutions would likely have persisted. His administration might have pursued a more unilateral approach to global issues, further isolating the US from its traditional allies. This shift could have opened the door for other global powers like China and Russia to step in and fill the leadership vacuum left by the US. The Middle East was another region where Trump's policies had significant impacts. His decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal and impose harsh sanctions on the country escalated tensions across the region. Also, his administration's close relationship with Israel and support for controversial policies, such as moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, further polarized the Middle East. In a second term, Trump might have continued his confrontational approach with Iran. His administration's hardline stance could have led to greater military tensions, potentially even conflict. If Iran resumed its nuclear program in response to U.S. sanctions, the situation could have spiraled into conflict, with far-reaching consequences for regional stability and global energy markets. Trump also negotiated the initial peace deal with the Taliban and set the wheels in motion for the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Had he been in office during the chaotic withdrawal in 2021, he would have faced intense criticism, especially as the Taliban quickly regained control. While mainstream media and Democrats would have likely condemned the outcome, Republicans might have defended it as a necessary step to end America's longest war. By 2022, new challenges would have emerged, particularly regarding Trump's inconsistent stance on Russia and Ukraine. Just days before Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, Trump praised Putin's moves as savvy and genius. Yet by July 2023, he told Zelensky, "No more, you have to make a deal," while warning Putin, "If you don't make a deal, we will give them more than they ever got." He even claimed he could end the Russia-Ukraine war in one day.
"I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than one day."
His unpredictable approach would likely have alienated allies and deepened domestic divisions, damaging his international reputation. On the other hand, Trump's unpredictability sometimes led to unexpected diplomatic breakthroughs, such as his meetings with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It's possible that Trump could have pursued a similar diplomatic strategy with Iran, seeking to negotiate a new deal that he could frame as a better alternative to the Obama-era agreement. However, success would have hinged on the willingness of the Iranian regime to engage and the broader geopolitical landscape. Trump's first term heavily focused on the economy, with policies designed to spur growth, reduce regulations, and reshape the tax code. However, while these moves aimed to boost prosperity, they also had significant side effects: widening income inequality, increasing federal debt, and impacting job creation. If Trump had secured a second term, these trends likely would have continued, bringing both positives and challenges. Trump's signature legislative achievement in his first term was the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, also known as the TCJA, which slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21% and provided temporary tax relief for individuals. Proponents claimed that these cuts stimulated economic growth and boosted investment, while critics argued that they disproportionately benefited the wealthy and large corporations, contributing to a growing federal deficit. When Trump took office in January 2017, the national debt was approximately $19.95 trillion, but by the end of his term in 2021, it had skyrocketed to roughly $27.75 trillion, a $7.8 trillion jump. In a second term, Trump might have pushed for additional tax cuts, particularly targeting high-income earners and businesses. While this could have further stimulated economic growth, especially in sectors like technology, finance, and manufacturing, the long-term consequences of these cuts would have raised significant concerns. The federal deficit, already exacerbated by COVID-19 spending, could have ballooned even further, raising serious questions about the sustainability of federal spending. Trump's tax policies likely contributed to widening income inequality, a growing issue during his first term that would have likely continued in a second term. While tax cuts and deregulation may have spurred economic growth, the benefits disproportionately favored the wealthy and large corporations, with middle-class and low-income Americans seeing fewer gains. For example, by the time the TCJA was set to expire in 2025, after-tax incomes for the top 1% of earners were projected to increase by approximately 3%, averaging about $2.1 million, while the bottom 60% of earners would see only a 1% increase, around $41,800. As a result, middle-class and low-income Americans might have struggled to keep pace, particularly with rising healthcare and housing costs. In 2024, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office reported that extending Trump's tax cuts for 10 years would add $4.6 trillion to the deficit. Therefore, the debate over social safety nets would likely have been central to Trump's second term. Programs like healthcare, Social Security, and welfare could have faced cuts as the administration sought to reduce federal spending, potentially deepening inequality and leaving vulnerable populations without critical support. Additionally, the administration's stance on labor market policies such as the federal minimum wage and workers' rights would have influenced the economic prospects of low-wage workers. A focus on deregulation might have benefited employers, but left workers with fewer protections and lower wages, further widening the income gap. Job creation was a key pillar of Trump's economic platform, especially in traditional industries like manufacturing, energy, and agriculture. He promised to bring back jobs lost to automation, globalization, and trade imbalances. However, the reality was more complicated. Despite his efforts, the U.S. actually lost 154,000 manufacturing jobs during his presidency, and nearly 1,800 factories closed between 2016 and 2018. In a second term, Trump would likely have continued to focus on these industries, potentially offering more incentives for companies to keep jobs in the U.S. This might have included further deregulation, subsidies for specific sectors, and trade policies designed to protect American workers. However, despite efforts to bring manufacturing back to American soil, U.S. labor costs often make it challenging to compete with countries like China and Vietnam, where wages are lower and production costs are cheaper. In fact, manufacturing jobs have been moving away from the U.S. since the late 20th century, driven by automation, robotics, and globalization, which allowed companies to shift production to countries with lower labor costs. While Trump often portrayed these job losses as the result of unfair trade practices or stolen jobs, the reality is more nuanced. Many of these jobs were lost due to technological changes and economic shifts that made it more cost-effective for companies to produce goods overseas. Moreover, the modern economy is increasingly shaped by automation and technological advancements, which continue to reshape the job market. A focus on traditional industries might have come at the expense of investment in emerging sectors like technology, renewable energy, and healthcare, where the future of job growth lies. Balancing job creation in traditional industries with the need to prepare workers for the jobs of the future would have been a central challenge for Trump's second term. Without significant investment in education, training, and infrastructure for new industries, the risk of falling behind in the global economy would have been a major concern. This is how Trump reacted to climate change, calling it a hoax.
So Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax.
As a result, his energy policies were firmly rooted in support for the fossil fuel industry. Fast forward to August 2024, when Trump's conversation with Elon Musk on X sparked controversy.
We unfortunately had a massive distributed denial of service attack against our servers.
Trump remarked, "You sort of can't get away from it at this moment," suggesting that fossil fuels could last perhaps hundreds of years, and that rising sea levels from melting glaciers would simply create more oceanfront property. He also criticized the Biden administration as a disgrace for not allowing oil drilling in Alaska's Arctic wilderness. What's more, Trump claimed that climate regulations were forcing farmers to give up their cattle, and argued that the threat of nuclear war far outweighed concerns about climate change. A second Trump term would likely have seen continued efforts to expand domestic oil and gas production. While this might have created jobs and boosted energy independence, it also raised significant environmental concerns. For Trump, however, the real threat wasn't climate change. It was nuclear war. On the other hand, Trump's skepticism about climate change and his administration's rollback of environmental regulations would have slowed the transition to renewable energy. The U.S. might have fallen behind in the global race for clean energy, missing out on opportunities for innovation and economic growth in the green sector. Moreover, Trump's withdrawal from international climate agreements, like the Paris Accord, signaled disengagement from global efforts to combat climate change. A second term would likely have continued this trend, impacting not only the environment, but also the U.S.'s standing on the world stage. As we consider the possibility of a second Trump term, we need to think about its long-term impact on American politics and Trump's lasting legacy. A second term would have undeniably influenced the 2024 election, making it not just about choosing the next leader, but also a referendum on Trumpism itself. Trump's influence on the Republican Party has already been profound, and a second term would have further solidified his control. The party's values might have continued shifting toward populism and nationalism, with significant implications for its relationship with traditional conservative ideals. The big question is, how would the GOP navigate this transformation, and how would it appeal to a broader electorate in a post-Trump era? So, what do you think about the hypothetical scenario of a Donald Trump victory in 2020? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and engage with Binge History as we explore more intriguing stories that shape our world.